That was a fucking epic intro, wasn't it? We're right back here at the Dawn of Man series. We finally got a proper wine glass. No longer the red solo cups. And guys, today we're going to talk about a super important topic that is literally going to change the world and already is changing the world. The topic that I want to discuss today is centralization versus decentralization, and how decentralization, first of all, can be the thing that actually prevents dystopia, or one of the many dystopia scenarios, but also what we need to be aware of, both as consumers and those people, if some of you are producers yourself, being in technology, how to prevent decentralization to be used as a guise for centralization. Okay, so let's get right into it. So most of the problems we always talk about when it comes to the world's gonna end, blah, and some of you think I might be very pessimistic, but I don't like to be pessimistic. I just want to be realistic, slightly optimistic, but always looking for solutions. Okay, so many of the issues that we always face is that we say, hey, there's few companies that have way too much control over information. That is an issue of centralization. Or maybe some people in government have, dictators have too much power. That's an issue again of centralization. Or perhaps that, an entire system sometimes, the bank, the financial industry, all relies on a few key players, like the Fed or maybe certain central banks. Again, that's an issue of centralization, because that's what you call points of failure. When there's very few points of failure in a system, meaning if one player falls out or something happens to this one person and everything descends into chaos, that's an issue of centralization. So many of the issues that we always talk about when we think, hey, this is how the world can end, this is how civilization can fall into dystopia and all the kind of the negative boohoo, goes back to centralization. Okay, so hopefully we made it clear right now. So what is the opposite, to having one central leader that makes decisions, or to having a few people, a few groups that decide, set the rules, enforce the rules, and so on? So let's take a closer look at why decentralization is better and how it actually can prevent many of the dystopia scenarios. So the first and best example that I could give of why centralization is bad and decentralization is better is a simple example of kings versus democracy. I think most of you would agree that the age of the kings wasn't necessarily the best time, because there was a single guy in charge who could decide what is the law and enforce it, and if one day he doesn't feel like the law applies, then he'll just change it. So things have changed a lot since then, and we've taken a lot of baby steps towards becoming more and more decentralized in the way we govern. Now we already have a fairly decentralized, government system out in the West, with representative democracy, but at the same time, it's not really perfectly decentralized yet. You still have a couple power players. Some of the big political parties and small political parties, for example, in the United States, they don't even get much of a say, can't even make it out onto the official election stage for debates. So when it comes to decentralization, the whole key is to take away power from a lot of those middlemen so that they cannot abuse it. See, one of the biggest conflicts that we have between centralization and decentralization is that, in essence, centralization can move faster. Centralization can be more effective. However, it comes at the cost that some of these players, once they accumulate too much power, they're able to actually garner more and more and more power, because the power basically manifests more power. And out of that then comes that they can abuse that power, which is why we have so many issues in this world in the first place. Whether it's big energy conglomerates, abusing nature, or whether it's governments going into wars that the country doesn't even want to go in, or whether it's banks essentially over leveraging the customers' money just so they can profit even more and live even bigger lives while risking the entire financial system of the world, as we've seen in 2008, for example. See, all this isn't just hypothetical examples. All of this has already happened. Each of these examples is actively happening and has happened over the past 10 years. And it's only a question of time till things will escalate to a whole new level where there's no going back. So this is why really we need to always actively pursue decentralization, because essentially it's like entropy. Entropy basically says that by nature things go towards chaos, right? And the same way it could be applied that with control, because the world, the world by nature is capitalistic. It's based on merit, and those that understand the system will always benefit from the system, and they'll get more and more control. And if it goes into the right hands, things will go wrong. So decentralization essentially makes sure that there's safeguards. It makes sure there's systems of checks and balances, and it makes sure that basically things can't go as wrong to the level where the whole system falls apart. So, step in, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies. That's where, one of the main reasons why cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin came up in the first place was because of the financial crisis of 2008, because many people were upset and fed up with how the banks abused the power to basically enrich themselves, and as a result blew up the entire economy. So the idea behind Bitcoin was to decentralize money, to decentralize the financial system and make it a peer-to-peer system so that you don't need these power players. So, I talk on my channel enough about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. Like, I don't want this to be about crypto. So I want to focus on the issues with decentralization and what things we need to be aware of in order to make sure that we can succeed in the long term. Because something I've already observed now is that centralization nowadays often comes with the guise of decentralization. So what that means is kind of like, a wolf in the sheep's skin, where we were trying to replace, the big banks, all those evil power players, but it seems like we're just replacing them with new power players. We've got miners, we've got masternodes, we've got people essentially holding, majority stakes of the entire coin supply. So what we need to be aware of when it comes to cryptocurrency or any other decentralized system is not that we just say, screw the old world, let's embrace the new world, but much rather we still challenge the new world, but we still take a close look at it and see, like, wait a second, is it truly what it claims to be? So one of the big issues that I see right now, for example, in crypto, and I'm a huge crypto enthusiast, is centralization of miners and centralization of networks in itself through masternodes. So right now in Bitcoin, about 4 to 5 mining groups make up about, let's say, 80% of the entire mining power. That means, we always, talk about how there's a few central bankers or few big companies, if they get into a room and they essentially make all the rules. The same thing's already happening for Bitcoin. So there's a couple big mining companies that they can decide from one day to the next, guys, like, we're going to switch from mining Bitcoin to mining Bitcoin Cash or to mining Bitcoin XYZ, whatever it is. Or they could say, guys, we're essentially going to halt mining. So, miners could say, we're going on a mining strike, more or less, unless we're going to raise fees. So the miners can vote on raising fees. And the reality is, in the long run, all we can do is suck it up. Because yes, in our minds, we say, look, well, if Bitcoin is going to rise price, transaction fees, we're just going to use a different coin. But how did that play out with Amazon? Initially Amazon, yes, it started with very noble intentions. It became very powerful, high adoption. And now when Amazon raises some fees on you, well, shrug your shoulders, because everybody uses Amazon. Like, as a seller, for example, you almost can't afford to not be on Amazon. So we oftentimes take these trade-offs and we just accept it for a fact, instead of saying, let me use this other competitive sales page. And there's plenty of them. We know there's so many websites where you can sell things online, but because Amazon has such major adoption, we take everything for granted. So what we have to make sure is that when we buy into a system like Bitcoin, that the majority of the mining is still decentralized, so that there aren't 4 or 5 guys that can get into a room and essentially run the entire system. Can say from one day to the next, guys, we're going to increase transaction fees by 10%. Well, you're going to say 10%, it's not going to kill you. But if they do that every 2 years, sooner rather than later, you're going to end up paying the same fees that you pay with your bank. So you really have to make sure that things are properly decentralized. The same thing applies to nodes. So other systems, like, for example, Dash, they're running on what's called proof of stake. There's not even mining involved. It's basically who owns the most amount of coins gets voting rights. So essentially the wealthy, and not just, they don't just get voting rights, they also get residual income on their coins. So the rich get richer, and the rich can say, guys, we're gonna raise transaction fees so we get even more, and they have voting rights. The average coin holder doesn't even have voting rights. So there's already now a lot of systems that take all these things into consideration to make it more decentralized, to make it better. And I think those need to be the conversations that need to be had, because most people in crypto, the average investor, they don't even know the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. So you can't even talk about the difference between proof of stake, graduating proof of stake, proof of importance, and all these different variation of consensus models that really need to be discussed to find the proper one that will have long-term decentralization. And you see, it's so important to have that conversation now, because if you wait too long, you're fighting a losing battle. Just take Amazon, for example. Again, the time to have made changes to how Amazon runs the business was when it was in a position where they didn't have as much leverage. Now, of course, the small retailers, they're dying out year by year, day by day. While Amazon, they don't need to make any concessions. They're big enough, they don't need you. So the time to make these partnerships, to make sure that the bylaws are correct and everything, is at a time when you don't need to have these conversations. And that's what we're with crypto right now. So with crypto right now, as crypto investors, we need to look at what kind of consensus models are being used. What is the difference between proof of work? What's the difference between proof of stake? What's the difference between graduating proof of stake and proof of importance, and all the kind of stuff that sounds very techy, but it is what will in the end determine how many rights, how much say does the average user have, so that you don't live in an age where 5 Bitcoin miners with huge pools that basically were financed by you who bought a mining contract now have all the rights and all the say, where they can just say, what, guys, everybody's using Bitcoin, everybody uses whatever coin, we're gonna increase transaction fees by 20%. So you want to make sure right now that everything is as decentralized as possible, so that you maintain your rights, and that we don't build more of the stuff we're trying to get away from. See, we already have centralized energy conglomerates. We already have, finance sector being run by a couple big bankers. We already have, so many dictators in the world that even now in the 21st century essentially have complete control over the countries. We've seen so many great things come out of decentralization, democracy being one of the big proponents of decentralization, where I think almost all of you watching this can agree that democracy is a good thing, right? It gives more power back to the people. And again, I'm a capitalist, I'm a libertarian. I love, providing opportunity, having opportunity and just merit speaking for itself. But even with that, there needs to be a system of checks and balances, so that there can be opportunity for everyone in the long run. Because otherwise, if it's just a free-for-all, and a few key players accumulate more and more power, if those key people have bad intentions, man, we're gonna live in a really bad society. We're gonna live in a time where, look, if the Bitcoin miner, the fact about Bitcoin miners is not just transactions. They decide the history of the entire network. And of course, while it's not as, it's not good for them to mess with the record, because then we lose trust in the system. But if this system is the system that we rely upon, what you gonna do? If all of commerce is based on one system, and forget about, even if it's not Bitcoin, if it's some other coin, if the entire system runs on this network, and 5 guys can change history, that is not a future I want to live in. That has so many consequences where we need to be aware of now. We need to make sure that the right people have voting rights, or that everybody has voting rights. So that is your job as an individual, because right now the industry is still so young where we can make changes. But to pull back, to not focus on crypto all too much, let's pull back to decentralization as a whole. So in your day-to-day life, just think about what kind of industries, what kind of factors do you think can transcend into dystopia because of centralization, because a few key players have so much control that they can ruin the entire system. And then let's think about, how can we change that? How can we decentralize that? How can we maintain the same efficiency and the same productivity while spreading the control a little bit further out, where there's fewer points of failure, meaning it's like if just one person fails, the whole system collapses. That should not be the case. So in the comment section below, I would love to hear from you guys how you see the battle between centralization and decentralization playing out, how you think we can use decentralization to a better extent, and how would be an ideal system looking like? How is it possible to maintain the efficiency, to maintain the productivity that centralization has, while at the same time putting in the system of checks and balances where no one party, where not one power player can really ruin the whole system. So, and this, guys, is key towards moving away from that bigger picture pain in the last episode. In the last episode, I talked about how in my book, or in my vision of the future, one of the big conflicts is between anarchy and plutocracy. Anarchy is just an absolute free-for-all. It's decentralization without rules. And plutocracy is essentially a few key players running everything. So it's not ultimate centralization, but it's essentially the elites running things. So I think the ideal middle ground would be a regulated decentralization. You need a mix of both. You need to maintain the efficiency of centralization, but keeping the safety nets of decentralization. So what would that look like? How can we create a system like that for all the different industries that are currently being way too centralized, in order to move towards the thriving utopia where everybody has opportunity, where everybody can still define their own destiny, where resources in our planet are still preserved, where nothing crazy can happen. So let's think about that. Let's start a conversation in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you guys, and if we get enough great thoughts going here, perhaps we can make another episode about this subject sometime later down the road and take it even deeper, even further, using what you guys share with me. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.
Yeah, this my note if I die. Think I try to write